Right, so Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's brass neck in the face of international condemnation really is quite something. Being accused of complicity in genocide one day and deciding to launch a crusade against Muslims the next. In the same week, she confirmed she'd been denounced to the International Criminal Court. Italy's self proclaimed defender of civilization decided the burqa was the gravest threat to national security. Not corruption, not organised crime, some fabric. The new cultural crimes law bans full-face veils, polices Muslim marriages, and monitors mosque funding, all packaged as a defence of Italian identity now. It's the familiar European formula, isn't it? Fear dressed as order, repression dressed as reform. Meloni calls it patriotism. History calls it something else, though, doesn't it? This is fascism with a bureaucratic grin, a government writing its prejudice into law while congratulating itself for keeping the country safe from the people it's persecuting. Well, it's not going well for her. Right, so Giorgia Meloni's government have just introduced a draft law that would ban full-face Islamic coverings such as the burqa and niqab in all public spaces across Italy. The proposal came directly from her party, Brothers of Italy, and was presented as part of a wider security package. And the text prohibits any garment, basically, that conceals the face in public institutions, school, universities, or retail spaces, and sets financial penalties between 300 and 3,000 euros for violations. Now, according to the official presentation and media reports that have published this story, the bill is being justified as a measure to protect Italian identity and prevent Islamic separatism and cultural crimes. Senior figures in Brothers of Italy used those exact terms in their public statements. But there is no precedent in Italian law for that kind of terminology. The framing is ideological rather than legal. Italy actually already has a 1975 law that forbids face coverings in public without justified cause. That law was originally designed for anti-terrorism purposes and already covers any legitimate security concern, therefore. When asked about all of this, Imam Massimo Abdallah Cozzolino of the Zaid ibn Thabit Islamic Center said that legislation of this type already exists and questioned the purpose of the new proposal. Well, aren't we all at this point? No government official offered a gap in the legal framework or data to justify what is basically duplication of a 50-year-old law. The original law has been sufficient for half a century now as it is. Therefore, the function of the new bill is not enforcement, it's got to be something else. Virtue signalling, maybe. It targets a visible Muslim practice and reframes it as a matter of national security. At a time when Meloni is in the legal crosshairs herself already over complicity in genocide, backing the self-proclaimed Jewish state against the majority Muslim people of Gaza, she's decided full-on Islamophobia is a good look to take on right now. The fascist leader of Italy no longer hiding it seems. Every time such a measure gets introduced in Europe, the pattern is the same, isn't it? Security language that is used to normalise exclusion, and the draft refers to phrases like cultural crimes repeatedly alongside Islamic fundamentalism or Islamic separatism. None of these terms have meaning in the Italian penal code at all. The invention of cultural crimes transforms difference itself into an offence, and you don't get more racist than that, do you? This linguistic shift places the bill in a long European lineage, though. France's 2010 face veil ban was justified as protecting living together. Denmark's ghetto laws were introduced to promote integration. Each uses the vocabulary of unity in order to legislate uniformity. Meloni's version follows that same trajectory, but with a distinctly nationalist tone. The claim that such steps are necessary to preserve cohesion is not supported by any evidence. Italy's Muslim population, estimated at around 2.6 million people, roughly 4% of the Italian population, has shown no record of political separatism or collective violence at all. The context of Meloni's party is crucial to understand all of this, though, of course. Brothers of Italy is the successor of the post-war Italian social movement, the SMI, founded by figures from Mussolini's regime. Meloni began her political career in the MSI's youth wing. The party's current leadership still uses that fascist-era slogan of God, homeland, family. So the continuity is direct and blatant. The bill, therefore, cannot be separated from that ideological background. That this party is bringing this forward doesn't actually come as a surprise. It's what they're all about. The state is once again defining cultural pluralism as a threat to the nation. The draft bill is broader than the headline about veils as well, though. It introduces new prison sentences of up to 7 years for arranging or coercing marriages through religious or cultural pressure. It criminalises so-called virginity testing with custodial penalties. It also requires all religious organisations without a formal agreement with the Italian state to disclose all sources of funding, especially those from abroad, and stipulates that public funding will be available only to groups that pose no threat to the state. Well, the legislation itself, by its very existence, has already decided they are threats then, surely. These provisions appear administrative. In some cases, you might not disagree necessarily, but their cumulative effect is discriminatory, and this is how. Italy's constitution allows formal recognition of religions through agreements known as intesi. Groups with such accords, Catholics, Jewish communities, Protestants, Buddhists, Hindus, they all receive tax benefits and access to state support through the 8 per mille scheme. Islam, however, is excluded from all of that. Repeated attempts by national Islamic organisations to obtain that same recognition have been rejected or ignored repeatedly, and as a result, virtually every single Muslim association in Italy falls under the unrecognised category, targeted by the new funding rules. So when ministers claim the clauses apply equally to all faiths, that is legally accurate, but substantively misleading. No major Catholic or Protestant organisation is affected by this. The entire burden falls on Muslims, who will now be compelled to report their donors to the state under threat of losing eligibility for local or regional grants. The law effectively establishes a surveillance scheme applied to one religion only. Opposition politicians have described the bill as discriminatory. Pier Francesco Maggiorino of the Democratic Party called it hateful and unnecessary. Religious leaders have warned that it will deepen existing hostility towards Muslims. Independent data already shows that Islamophobia is entrenched in Italian society. Employment discrimination, housing inequality, and local opposition to mosque construction are widespread. Under these conditions, a law targeting Muslim funding and dress functions as institutional reinforcement of prejudice. Supporters invoke the language of security and women's rights. We've heard all those before when it comes to the niqab and the burqa, have we not? But they provide no evidence. No statistics link face coverings to crime. The Interior Ministry has not presented any national security assessment describing veils as a particular risk. The justification is purely ideological. The duplication of existing law without evidential need indicates that the measure's purpose is symbolic rather than practical. It's designed to communicate identity politics through legislation. The ideological continuity between the fascist period and the present is not a rhetorical device. The ruling party uses the same vocabulary of national regeneration. That slogan of God, homeland, family was employed by Mussolini's regime and now anchors Meloni's own campaign branding. Several current ministers have professional backgrounds in organisations that trace their lineage directly to the Italian social movement. Fascism begins with the claim that diversity is decay. It identifies a population deemed incompatible with the national project and then codifies that exclusion through administrative language. In the 1930s, Italy's racial laws defined Jewish citizens as incompatible with national purity. In 2025, Meloni's draft law frames Islam as a comparable threat to cohesion. The mechanism is identical, isn't it? Redefine pluralism as disorder and legislate belonging. 2 days before this announcement of this burqa ban bill, though, Meloni revealed that she'd been denounced to the International Criminal Court for alleged complicity in genocide in connection with Italy's support for Israel's military campaign in Gaza. I covered this in another video the other day. The complaint filed by lawyers and academics alleges that Italian arms exports and diplomatic backing contributed to acts violating the Genocide Convention. The ICC has acknowledged receipt but has not yet opened a formal investigation, though, so this bears keeping an eye on, because we can all think, I'm sure, of a number of European leaders whose pro-Israel positioning throughout the atrocities, who we think might deserve a day in the dock. But the precedent needs to be set, and Meloni is very much in the crosshairs on this. Under the Rome Statute, aiding and abetting genocide requires knowledge of the perpetrator's intent. In previous tribunals, such as Karadzic and Kurdik, prosecutors used political rhetoric and discriminatory state policy to prove that leaders shared the perpetrator's hostility towards the targeted group. Meloni's new legislation, which treats Islam as a cultural danger while she supports Israel's war on Gaza, fits that evidentiary pattern as well. She might just have indicted herself even more. Should prosecutors decide to examine the case, they could argue that Meloni's domestic policy demonstrates her animosity towards Muslims as a class, providing circumstantial evidence of knowledge and alignment. The government claims that the ban will protect women's rights by liberating them from patriarchal control, but women's rights groups and Muslim organisations have all rejected that argument. The effect of such bans, they explain, is to restrict women's participation in public life and increase stigma. A woman who chooses to wear a niqab or a burqa will be excluded from education, work, and public institutions. The policy removes autonomy under the pretext of protection. Feminist researchers across Europe have documented the same pattern. Far-right and nationalist movements often use the rhetoric of feminism to legitimise racism. By presenting Muslim women as victims who must be saved, governments justify coercive policies as moral duties. And the result is greater marginalisation of those women and reinforcement of patriarchal control by the state. Italy's constitution protects freedom of religion under Articles 8 and 19. Limitations are permitted only when necessary to safeguard public order. The government has not demonstrated any public order necessity. Legal scholars therefore expect constitutional challenge to happen if this bill is enacted. But European law provides parallel guarantees as well. Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights and Article 10 of the EU Charter protect the right to manifest religion. The European Court of Human Rights 2014 judgment in SAS versus France upheld France's veil ban narrowly, using the rationale of living together. That decision remains a controversial one. It's been criticised by UN special rapporteurs as inconsistent with human rights norms. But Italy's proposal goes further than that by defining Islam itself as a potential threat, placing its compatibility with the convention in serious doubt. Within Italy, the governing coalition's main partners, Lega and Forza Italia, have endorsed the measure. Opposition parties lack the parliamentary strength to stop it. The European Commission has declined public comment. Legal experts expect the bill to pass before the year's end as a result. But outside Italy, it's received support from far-right parties across Europe as well, even if you yourself have heard nothing about this so far. In the UK, for instance, because it would be remiss of me to not come back to this country, Reform UK MP Sarah Potchin praised Meloni's approach and urged Keir Starmer to implement similar restrictions in the interests of public safety. Potchin's maiden speech in the House of Commons, as some of you might be aware, was on this very issue of face coverings, and her argument was utterly flawed for all of the same reasons Meloni's bill is. This statement was widely reported and directly links British and Italian far-right rhetoric. And the endorsement validates Green Party leader Zach Polanski's description of Reform UK as a fascist party, as was seen on last week's Question Time. The ideological pattern is clear, therefore. Both movements use security as a synonym for cultural conformity. If you don't align with the desired image, you are a dissident. Meloni's bill aligns Italy with an established European trend, from France to Belgium to Austria to Denmark. They've all restricted Islamic dress in the last decade, invoking national values and public security. These laws have faced sustained criticism from human rights monitors for their discriminatory impact. The European Union has failed to address the pattern systematically, focusing its rule of law enforcement on judicial independence rather than on minority rights. So this ongoing silence amounts to tolerance of it. So this broader context matters because it demonstrates that Islamophobia is no longer an outlier within European politics. It's become more and more of a consensus. Governments of varying ideologies have adopted the same framework, treating Muslim visibility as a governance issue. Italy's legislation extends that norms to a country with a deep historical link to European fascism. Meloni's presentation of the ban as a feminist reform repeats colonial arguments once used by European powers abroad. The idea that Muslim women must be saved from their own culture. Interviews with Italian Muslim women published by rights organisations confirm that the effect of such laws is exclusion and not empowerment. They restrict access to public education, employment, civic life. The policy therefore reproduces the same dynamic it claims to want to dismantle: male and state control over women's autonomy. This gendered justification operates as political cover. It presents the law as moral advancement while concealing its true purpose, asserting state dominance over cultural expression. If passed, the law will likely face challenge in both Italian and European courts. Italy's constitutional court has previously protected religious expression where restrictions lacked evidence of necessity, so we'll have to wait and see whether they do so again here. However, Meloni's coalition has indicated an intention to reform the judiciary, which could affect that independence. I wonder why they might want to do that. The European Court of Human Rights will take years to review any appeal, so by the time a judgment arrives, the law will no doubt have served its political function, consolidating public acceptance of Islamophobia. The current proposal reflects what analysts have called procedural fascism, the use of legal procedures and processes to establish hierarchy while maintaining the appearance of democracy. Elections and courts remain, but the principles they're meant to uphold get inverted. Equality before the law becomes conditional on identity. Italy's 1938 racial laws followed the similar path, beginning as administrative measures framed as protection of civilisation. They gradually evolved into persecution. Meloni's cultural crimes bill repeats this same structure: bureaucratic language concealing ideological exclusion. It represents a continuation, not an aberration, in Italian political history, sadly. Meloni's domestic policy has direct implications for her position before the International Criminal Court, too. Should the prosecutor pursue the complaint filed against Meloni, this law would form part of the evidentiary context, though. International jurisprudence recognises that discriminatory domestic governance can demonstrate intent or knowledge of persecution abroad. So the pattern of state hostility towards Muslims is now formally codified in Italian law. And therefore, by enacting this legislation, Meloni actually weakens her own defence at the ICC should she need to provide one. A policy meant to assert control internally could become external proof of ideological alignment with those accused of atrocities abroad. Across the continent, Islamophobia serves as a binding ideology of populist and far-right movements. Politicians from France to Hungary to the Netherlands to Italy all speak of defending Christian Europe. The coordination extends through shared media platforms and think tank networks and campaign funding, and the result is a de facto bloc of governments normalising religious discrimination. The European Commission's reluctance to intervene illustrates the political cost of confronting this alliance. This drift has tangible effects. It influences asylum procedures, border policing, foreign relations. We see it all in our own domestic politics. Europe's credibility as a defender of human rights weakens each time a member state legislates for prejudice. Reform UK's alignment with Meloni confirms that this ideology very much has an English-speaking counterpart, I'm afraid. The party's call for Britain to follow Italy's example frames Islamophobia as a form of pragmatism now. The lack of condemnation from mainstream political leaders reinforces that framing. When a Prime Minister remains silent on an overtly discriminatory policy proposed by a European ally, silence very much becomes complicity too. But we shouldn't be surprised in that from someone like Starmer, should we? Italy's case demonstrates how Islamophobia functions as a mechanism of governance rather than isolated prejudice. It provides governments with an organising principle in moments of instability. By defining an internal enemy, by making one up effectively, the state diverts attention from economic stagnation and institutional decay. The politics of fear becomes a tool of cohesion. Each iteration reinforces authoritarianism under democratic procedure. Every authoritarian project leaves a documentary record of its own ideology. Meloni's cultural crimes bill will remain as written evidence of discrimination. In the short term, it may consolidate her support base. In the long term, it will stand as proof of intent in any legal or historical reckoning yet to come. The irony, frankly, is structural. The same government facing allegations of aiding violence against Muslims abroad is enacting laws that criminalise Muslims at home. The ideological consistency of it all is undeniable. The only question now is whether European institutions will treat this development as acceptable. If the European Union and the Council of Europe remain silent, as I very much expect they will end up legitimising Islamophobia as compatible with democracy in so doing, though. And that silence would mark a defining moment, which would be the point at which never again ceased to apply to Muslims. Giorgia Meloni's proposed burqa and niqab ban is not an isolated domestic measure. It's part of a systematic transformation within European politics more widely, where Islamophobia is used as an instrument of identity and control. The law is redundant, unconstitutional, and incompatible with the principles Italy claims to uphold, though. It violates national and European human rights guarantees, and it will intensify discrimination against a population already subjected to systemic bias. By introducing it, Meloni undermines her credibility before international courts and exposes her government's ideological continuity with Italy's fascist past. The measure reveals not strength, but fear, a state attempting to preserve cohesion by policing culture. The endorsement from Reform UK shows this project is certainly not confined to Italy. It is now part of a transnational far-right movement that redefines democracy as uniformity. And the same justification, security before rights, is being adopted across Europe. Each repetition erodes the moral foundations of liberal governance and is another step on the road to fascist rule. Europe once defined itself by the protection of human rights. It now defines itself by placing conditions on that. The Italian case makes clear that fascism no longer arrives through force, it arrives through changes in the law. And here lies the ultimate reversal, therefore, doesn't it? The law Meloni designed to display her own authority may yet become the evidence that provides her guilt at the ICC. It'll stand as a record of intent, a legal monument to the ideology it sought to normalise. The very statute written to criminalise others could in time help convict her. For more on Meloni facing a day in the dock at The Hague and how she's, of all Europe's pro-Israel leaders, has ended up in this position first, setting the precedent, so to speak, do check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.